everybody. Hi, welcome to the Mom Series of Misunderstanding of Multiplicity. My name's Maria, and I'd like to make a video today on a topic that I've been really interested in for a long time. Not only as a student of social work when I was a student as a social worker, but as a client in therapy for post-traumatic stress, and then the diagnosis of MPD, which is now called D.I.D. Obviously, I've looked at this from both sides, from clinician point of view and client-patient point of view, and been watching the historical patterns that have been going on regarding behavior that has to do with trauma responses and recovery movements, and the very much present profit in pathology and profit in recovery, which I've done a lot of videos about. So today I want to talk about trauma, post-traumatic stress, and the trauma industry. And I'm going to be reading from an article. I'm going to be looking at this article, which I cannot get on my screen to show to you. I'm going to give you the linkage for it. And it was written in 2001, and it comes from the Center for Counter Conditioning Therapy. Written by Iana Singer. It's written in a very empathetic, neutral, I'd say non-biased approach with good resources. So it begins by asking the question, can we be emotionally held hostage to an event that happened earlier in our day or even earlier in our lives? An event or a trauma. Whether it was just an event that was really horrible that we didn't like, we had a bad experience with it, just kind of rubbed us the wrong way, or it was a really horrific event. Can we be held emotionally hostage with pain, with somatic pain in our body, with panic responses, trigger responses like racing heart, digestion shutting down, dry mouth, ears pounding, headache, all the things that go with trauma, all the things, okay? And then react as though that trauma is happening over and over again, even when it's not, which a lot of people have defined as a flashback or a recurrence of the trauma when it's not happening. So, say, I don't know, my refrigerator falls on me. It could happen where I live. It could happen anywhere. But say the refrigerator falls on me, right? It's a big sinkhole falls on me. Now, I could talk about it. An ambulance could come. They could tell me, okay, you're away from that horrible refrigerator that just smacked you. And we want you to talk about your feelings about that refrigerator falling on you. Now, I could be angry. I could be angry at whoever put that refrigerator there, whoever installed it, whoever made the refrigerator, whatever caused the refrigerator to fall on me. And I can yell and scream and rant and rave about that and have my trauma reaction and, I hate refrigerator, not going near a refrigerator. Okay, and every time I walk by my refrigerator, I can kind of look at it. Once a new one's in place, I can look at it and go, back away from it, walk around it, walk fast, go the other way. Okay, I could do avoidance, I could navigate it, or I can avoid it. I'm never going near a refrigerator again. I'm certainly not stepping in that spot again. I'm not going to get hurt. What Freud, that old Sigmund Freud, said is what happens to us not only now, but as children. We drag like a security blanket into life, and we keep tripping over it. Okay? But then went further and said, we repress it. It's in the recesses of our mind. If we don't talk about it, if we never tell, say we're abused, sexually abused, and we never tell an adult, or it's shoved off as nothing happened, or we're told to forget it, or we'll talk about it when you get older, or parents, grandparents, whatever, try to replace that bad event with making it a really happy day the next day. Maybe they'll forget. They're just a little kid. This won't impress them. Back in the 1970s, a firefighter came up with the idea that people that are trained to respond to traumatic events, soldiers, policemen, first responders, and definitely firemen, would do better if they debriefed the stressful incident called, let me say it, critical, isn't it critical? Let's see. And the Surgeon General coup, I'm going to refer to this. They came up with, page 3, by page 3 you'll see them referring to, and there's a whole lot before that, called CISD. I want to read a couple things to you about it. And it's critical incident stress debriefing. I have to remember that because they keep wanting to say clinical. But it's critical incident stress debriefing. CISD. And this is so impressed at me. There's a lot of doctors, you'll recognize their name, they're in this. So it's very well vetted. That they started doing this debriefing of firemen. And the chief of firemen was interviewed about, was it actually helping firemen? Like if they went and responded, if the whole crew went and responded in the 70s to a big, horrible fire, and they couldn't save not one person, did it help to not let that person go home, but instead make them stay there and talk about the event? Like, you're sorry, I can't let you go home until you BIS, you critically, you give me the incident and you tell me what you experienced, what you felt, what you saw, how you feel now. Your heart's still racing. What is your adrenaline still pumped up? Are you angry? Are you whatever? And you keep talking about it. And we're going to make a couple of appointments, but right now you're going to talk about it. The person could still be in shock. The person could still be like, I can't believe what I just saw. I can't believe my partner is dead. Haven't even processed it yet, but I want you to talk about it now. Okay? So that's what they started talking about. And what this article, I'm just going to read the beginning of it so it makes sense to you. Can we be held emotionally hostage by an earlier or even recent event of trauma? Today, trauma counselors rush to plane crashes, shootings, fires, earthquakes, and disasters to get victims to talk. Shout about what they saw, what they heard, what they felt. These counselors tell us that the victim must be debriefed as soon as possible to prevent the onset of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Now, in the near future, or in the worst case scenario, in years to come, becoming PTSD. PTSD is spoken of with such a certainty of occurring and at such a threat that we must wonder how a responsible health worker, employer, or victim could deny the help being offered. That got my attention. But how did this disaster strategy begin? What fuels the momentum? One soldier described trauma this way. It required a mental readjustment to face the stark fact that I had been scared. Scared not only physiologically, or psychologically, but physiologically. For my pulse rate had gone up, my digestion had stopped, my adrenal glands were sensitive, everything in me was on fright. All my senses were awake. My blood vessels had constricted to produce a dry tongue and an almighty thirst. Maybe you had to run for your life in a firestorm. Or the police have just told you that your spouse, child, or parent was dead on arrival after a car accident. Or you witnessed your child hit by a car. Or you have just escaped a tornado, breaking loose from being sucked from your home, or stuck by flying debris. No one can remain neutral and in control in such dire circumstances. Everyone reacts to extraordinary circumstances and events. The American Psychiatric Association, the APA, and the Diagnostic Criteria Manual defines post-traumatic stress as caused by an incident that is outside the range of human experience and that would markedly be distressing to almost anyone. PTSD can lie dormant, according to Dr. Coop, former USA Surgeon General, and may not. It may not show up until years after the traumatic event. These authorities acknowledge the magnitude of such an event, then assign emotional shock and the depressive reaction that often follows a horrific event to the realm of the disease. They classify PTSD as a medical problem. Let's say I arrive home after jogging 10 miles, sweating, heart pounding, to find a dead chicken hung over my front door. My anger will surge and display with increasing breathing rate, higher blood pressure. I will be in dynamic physical state. Am I displaying symptoms of a physical illness, a medical condition? Or am I having an emotional reaction which may manifest such exaggerated physical symptoms? Because I just ran from a dead chicken, does that make it a disease? Consider a policeman who's been pursuing a suspect on foot and then finds a dead body. In his or her reaction, the presentation of the symptoms, are they of a disease? If I or the policeman show physical signs of shock and then manifest any signs of depression, APA, the American Psychiatric Association, and Dr. Coop would say, yes, you've got a disease. It's PTSD. Those who apply this disease logic to post-traumatic stress disorder assume that the medical treatment of a physical illness also applies to PTSD. Let's look at some of the things they do. I know this is an older article and there's lots of behavioral tools and stuff. I know that. They know that too. Okay, so what they're saying is this crossover is a misapplication. The best example they have is grief. Grief is a classic example, and it is, of misapplication of the disease model. The reason I'm telling you all about this is MPD D.I.D is a disease trauma model. That is what the majority of psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, licensed or not, mastered or not, whatever they are who's treating you, spiritual counselors, they're going to tell you it's a disease trauma model. They're going to follow that trauma model. What's the trauma model? The Wilburian model, the Freudian model, where you have to relive that trauma and talk about it over and over and every detail of it, or you're not going to get well. It's going to be repressed in the recesses of your mind. Okay? So let's look at grief. Compare it. So grief is a classic example of the misapplication of the disease model to human emotional behavior. The so-called stages of dying, so popular with grief and trauma counselors, and believe me, they just got really popular in early 80s because I was in school then. Began with a Swiss psychiatrist, Kubler-Ross, Helen Kubler-Ross, in her book On Death and Dying. She declared that dying patients move through 5 emotional stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Soon her model was taught in medical school and seeped into the mental health treatment. Then it appeared in everyday language. Every one from columnists to bankers to school teachers, we're talking about stages of grief. Her model has become more than a model. People, professionals, and lay alike adopted it as prescribed. There is a correct way to grieve in stages. Superimposing the disease model upon human emotional behavior from trauma projects a false impression of predictability. Is a suggested model just a hypothesis, or is it the universal law of behavior applicable to all humankind? Are we again allowing an interesting premise, perhaps valuable in developing new conjectures, to become the one and only truthful way to view and heal the effects of trauma? In fact, research at universities including Harvard and University of California have found no normal way to grieve. No normal way to grieve. Okay? There's no normal grief cycle. There's no healthy way to grieve. And that most bereaved persons behave however they behave. Rather, people show a great variety of responses to loss. As many as 6 million different responses. Okay, so I'm going to get into neurodiversity and unique responses and how everybody acts different for different traumas. So there isn't one way. There's no cookie cutter. I've been saying this for years. Are we again? I'm going to read that over again. So there are 6 billion people on the earth. There are 6 billion unique ways to express and react to grief. Same way with trauma. It's a loss. It's a shock. It's a loss. Same way. 6 billion different ways. Okay. Now to the claims of debriefing are being contested. Debriefing, talking about what you just saw, what you just heard, what you just felt, may have no impact on, or worse yet, may actually make it worse. I need to say that again. Now to the claims of debriefing are being contested. Debriefing, talking about what you saw, what you heard, and what you felt. That's what your experience was. May have no impact on, or at worst, encourage dire consequences. Consequences practitioners could not want. You would hope they wouldn't want that. In adults, research shows that the debriefing method called critical incident stress debriefing, CISD, exacerbated depression in road accident victims and in emergency workers attending serious bus crashes. Those debriefed had significantly higher scores for morbidity and distress. Similar findings occur in studies of earthquake victims, burn victims, car accident victims, and Gulf War victims. Furthermore, grief counseling in which children drew, and this was really big, talked or acted out their feelings can exacerbate depression later on in adulthood. According to the Royal Society of Medicine, the fact is that children, and this is so important, you guys, children notice adult behavior, absorbing adult emotional cues to the catastrophic. What the child notices then propels the youngster's own emotional response. That's so true. Children are sponges. The most important thing when a trauma happens to a child or around them, or to somebody around them, they are watching, feeling, and absorbing how are the adults acting around them. And they're going to imitate that. Very important you know that. If instead of releasing children from their trauma, debriefing could be etching horrific images into these young memories so that they cannot forget. Why would we use these practices? Could reliving the horror be hitching youngsters to a trailer full of upsetting scenarios to drag throughout life? Is that what we want for our children or for anybody's children? Post-traumatic stress disorder is fostered by the widespread belief that horrible events can be repressed stuffed away, pushed down until they, quote unquote, break through the memory, as if the memory is a catchment facility. If efficacy is so questionable, why is debriefing and the notion of post-traumatic stress disorder so popular? The answer lies within Freud's theories and speculations. According to Freud, childhood trauma is the basis for chronic flaws revealed in adulthood. All traumas, all flaws, okay? The adult is held hostage to earlier traumas, and a leap in logic from Freudian theory of memory repression becomes the foundation for emotional behavior as pathology, a scientific study of the nature of disease. Quote, so Freud's speculation is that the memory houses repressed remembrances waiting to erupt, has victimized patients and therapists alike. And if you don't think repeating your trauma to a therapist is not traumatizing to a therapist, you haven't sat and listened to enough war stories of trauma. That's all I'm saying. It can happen. And that's why social workers, counselors, therapists really need to have somebody they can go sit and say, what was that? They need to take a breath, right? Because they're listening to trauma all day. All I'm saying, you gotta have some special cleansing and get that shit off of you. Okay. And a leap in logic from Freudian theory of memory impressions becomes the foundation for emotional behavior as pathology. Scientific studying said. All right, I repeated that. I'm sorry. Freud's speculation that memory houses repressed remembrances waiting to erupt. La 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 la. Therapists alike. Okay. Hate when I can't see what I'm reading. The flaw with this therapeutic deduction was that many patients didn't recall any abuse until they had a therapist's intervention. Next came proponents of false memory syndrome, who contested the truth of repressed memory recall. The irony, of course, is that true victims of abuse wish their memories were lost, repressed, and gone forever. Unfortunately, they are plagued with ghastly images from the past. Their torment is trivialized and individualized by all the suspicion over who is telling the truth. Who's telling the truth? Mostly, because you make an allegation, you don't get to do it without people questioning. So you want to tell your truth? You want to point your finger and say, that person did that to me, and you can't ask me nothing about it. Well, no, see, that's not how therapy goes. So your therapist should be digging, should be poking the holes in your story, should be investigating with your whole damn family, should be dragging people in to say, hello, excuse me. Somebody should be investigating it. But you come up 20 years later with a repressed memory that didn't come until you were in therapy for this or that, a headache, a buttache, a this, a that, you couldn't sleep. My heart raced when I walked in this room all the time. Oh, I just couldn't be intimate with my husband anymore. I got this panic. I wasn't going to do that for my husband. Whatever it is. You don't get to walk into a freaking therapist's office and uncover a repressed memory without proving it. And we got a whole lot of people that are just, you could turn on your TV any given day. Somebody's suing somebody. You can go to your Instagram. Here's what this article looks at. What good does it do to talk about it over and over again? It actually looks at all the medications that makes people depressed in the now of the trauma. Some adult should have seen something going on, right? The child should have been behaving a little different, or else the real problem is maybe the adults all around the person that weren't catching on to that there's something wrong there. They weren't picking up on any of it. They weren't looking on how's the person's face looking. Do they look like something happened to them? Are they sulking? I don't know. Did they just come back to the dinner table and scarf down a dessert and act like everything's fine and never say a word? But now they're having a repressed, horrible memory. Okay. what I look at is, what is that person gaining from telling or from revealing this truth? And this article looks at it too. People that reveal repressed memories is not true post-traumatic stress. Because when you are in a trauma, when you're young or when you're older, 2 minutes ago, if the refrigerator fell on me, I know what happened. I know in here what happened. I might not be talking about it, but I know what happened. And I am responding and acting as if it's going to happen all the time. And my life shows and bears proof of that. Got many people that they're just functioning at high level. They're fantastic. They go into therapy and all of a sudden, oh my God, I realized somebody did this to me when I was a kid. And that's why I didn't pass that class. And that's why this happened. And that's why that happened. Okay? So, what I say to that? Psychiatrist Peter R. Bregan said, MD, and he's a biggie dude, said, are you saying no pathogen has been identified that causes emotional distress? No, there's no pathogen. There's no way you can say this person has emotional distress. Okay? You can look at an MRI and it can tell you this part that's anxious is firing up more. This part is attenuating. This part is smaller. This part is blue, you're depressed. This part is orange. This part is misshapen. You can see all that, but you're making a lot of speculations from a brain MRI, okay? We've seen patients who get depressed when they take... Okay, so this psychiatrist cut it all down. He said, we have seen patients who get depressed when they have hormonal disorders. Sometimes we see people that get depressed when they're just plain sick. Sometimes people get depressed when they've had head injuries. But, continue, there's never been a particular pathogen or process clearly identified with depression, except, interestingly enough, with psychiatric drugs, which muck about the neurotransmitters. It is clearly established that, for example, Prozac and Halcion can cause depression. Okay? Now, they talk about mapping the billions of cells in the DNA. How they can kind of look at pursuers to Huntington's disease, cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophy, and that science tried to say we can do this with anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, or post-traumatic stress disorder too. But before the 1970s, there was little or no attention was given to the human reactions of emergency workers, firefighters, or soldiers coming back from war. Okay? Mental health professionals assumed that their training prepared them for this. I've talked about this before where I said, if you're a soldier and you go to basic boot camp, they're going to put you through military basic training. You are in boot camp. They're going to put you in every situation, like training day. If you are an EMS worker, you're going to get thrown into the fire. You are going to have to wear a gas mask. You're going to have to run around in your equipment all heavy and sweat, see if you can handle it. You're going to prepare for the traumatic situations. So if you're running towards the fire and you're prepared for getting stuck in the fire and the smoke being all around you and being unable to breathe and unable to see and your throat burning and having to use your oxygen and having to drag people out that are burning and the smell of human flesh, and you already know all this, are you still going to have trauma? They're asking. And I said this over and over again. You can only train for so much, but the training prepares you, right? Now with kids that are abused, and I said this again, there are children actually go to a place in their head where they start preparing for their parents to fight at the dinner table or when they go to bed at night. If you are a child who is surrounded with horrible domestic violence, where you don't know if your mother's going to be alive or dead in the morning, and you don't know if your daddy's going to come kill you guys to shut you up, and you don't know where you're going to end up living, and every night is like this in your bed. You might end up with your mother with a bloody face, bloody body, laying next to you, looking for comfort from you, because that happens too. Or your drunk father slobbering all over you saying, I'm sorry, shh, don't tell. Okay? So you got that a steady diet of that every night, you're prepared for it. Kids are prepared for it. They go to bed with their covers up to here. Their eyes like this. They toss, they turn, they got the covers over their head. They're in the fetal position. Anytime they hear them, they're ready to run. Okay? That's what kids do. If somebody's going to sexually assault them, if you're going to go to a family member's house and somebody's going to sexually assault you, when you're in the car, you're going to start backstepping. Where are we going? We're going to, I don't want to go to that daycare. I don't want to go to that. No, Mommy, I don't want to go to that daycare. Why? I don't know why. What are you afraid of at the daycare? I don't know. It starts then. It starts then. And shame on parents for not noticing it then. Shame on all the adults for not looking then at the little child that is like this. And I don't know. Do we have to go? Do we have to go there again? We're going to Uncle Who's house. Oh, I don't want to go there. Can we stay home? Oh, I don't want to go there. Why? Because if something traumatic happened there that's going to come up like a boogeyman later and drive them crazy and make them sick later in life, it did it then too. Okay? So you have a child response then. I don't want to go, Mommy. I don't want to go, Daddy. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Or, oh, can we go home now? Or, oh. And it just, kids let you know. Yeah, they do. Whether they say the words or they don't, they let you know. Okay. After we've said all that, there's the Mitchell model. We'll begin with the Freudian hypothesis that by reliving the trauma, the victim eliminates it. So the abrogation of the trauma actually eliminates it. That's why when you go to therapy, they want you to talk about it. That's why when you do this critical incident stress debriefing, it's supposed to help because you're reliving it. Because you're going to talk about it enough and you're eventually going to relive it. You're going to abrogate it. You're going to feel the whole thing again. It's going to overtake you. And you're going to get emotional. You're going to cry. You're going to scream. You're going to punch. You're going to do everything. You're going to puke. All of it. You're going to abrogate it. Okay? And this includes intense re-exposure to the incident through reliving what one saw, heard, and felt their experience. Debriefing, the shortened term for CISD, was supposed to mitigate the harmful effects of traumatic stress and lessen subsequent trauma symptoms. CISD, or debriefing as used, is not to be confused with the military method of debriefing. Not like that. A necessary step for improving rescue skills. Social scientists took a closer look at Mitchell's model, relive it all, okay? They wanted to know if CISD lessens the consequences of trauma. But they found that the claims anecdotal and were lacking scientific rigor. Given the illusion of science and the precision through claims of theoretical roots and empirical evaluation, an idea readily transforms something with a life and momentum all its own. In fact, researchers called the popularity of debriefing the barium effect. So when you and I go to our therapist and we spew all this out and we relive it and we abrogate it and we keep retelling it, and then we go to a social support group for it, and then we all get together in our tribe and we talk about it and we're telling our truth. You know what they called it? You know what the APA, you know what the researchers called it? The barium effect. Bariums are used for enemas and when you expose. and waste. The Barnum effect. The pretty packaging and clever marketing of a nice idea after the master showdown who built an empire on the promise that a little gullibility can be taken a long way. Gullibility. The damage was done. Old methods had been wrapped up and decorated with a new name. Sensitivity training came about in the 60s and 70s and was folded into the burgeoning recovery movement. Burgeoning. I'm not going to say that word, but recovery movement of the 80s and 90s. This is really, really special because I came around about the 80s, 90s in therapy with the recovery movement. Oh, I was there in the 70s too. But the 80s and 90s, I was really there. Known today as support groups. These support groups hold in common many characteristics, including peer pressure, confession, and conformity of thought, and conformity of autobiographical memories. The same tactics applied, I want you to listen, the same tactics applied during the Communist Revolution in China. Brainwashing of Korean POWs, and here in the U.S. by communist cells during the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Today's variations include the recovery movement's slogan, "Think with your heart, not your head." Sound familiar to anybody? Sound familiar? Just saying. Social scientists call this effort ideological re-education, or a modest form of elective brainwashing. Elective brainwashing. Whatever way CISD is researched, analyzed, or investigated, the end result is the same. If a firefighter, for example, witnesses a traumatic event, he or she is presumed to be on the road to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and must be debriefed. Yet no one except the trauma counselors will claim that the strategy prevents PTSD or heals anyone. It doesn't. Much less without possibly harming them more in the process. Unfortunately, the Western European medical community has long accepted, almost as a divine decree, that there is such a sickness as repressed emotions and memories, and the only way to be healthy is to relive the traumatic event by medicalizing what is a non-medical condition and introducing therapy subject matter that is vastly abused. Medicine is propping up a lot of dwindling careers. It really is. Professor McEwen said of the European Trauma Center. Despite the substantial research debunking the claims of CISD proponents and challenging PTSD as a medical label, the trauma industry goes on. It's booming. Trauma is everywhere. After all, the whole of psychiatry and psychology and counseling is embedded in the Freudian speculation. By law, the workplace now is held to sensitivity training and to CISD debriefing. An event just happened, an incident report, something just happened. Let's write it up. How do we all feel about it? I don't know. Let's keep talking about it. How do we feel about it? How do we feel about it? Somebody might get post-traumatic stress if you don't. Because you know why? Because you will be liable. The employer, the property, the place, if something bad happens here, right here on my property, if something bad happens. If I fall down in a pothole and I hurt myself, I need to tell my manager right away. If I don't yell and scream and talk about it, they might get sued. Somebody else could file whatever and sue them, right? Okay. Management therefore must protect employees against so-called pathology. It goes on and on, you guys. Okay. So talking to a police chief, let me just let that slide for a minute. While the recovery movement method receives accolades from the firefighters administration, frontline personnel find it intrusive and unnecessary. One firefighter told me, the chiefs like to advertise what they are doing for us, but most of us think it's a joke. I asked one fire captain how his crew saw mandatory CISD. He answered by telling me about a firefighter who was rescued from inside a burning crack house with hot bullets exploding all around him. The firefighter's shift was over and he was tired, but I couldn't allow him to leave, so I told him to go to sleep. Aren't we contradicting and undermining our own training that an individual has the wherewithal and resilience, the personal tools to manage his or her life? Are we sick and feeble unless we are given a pass by an authority figure? Are we that feeble-minded? Are we so sensitive? Did our mamas put tenderizer in us, all over us in our womb? I often wonder this. If people raise their voice lately to people in the workplace, like, tell me I'm with me, tell me it's your voice, I'm hanging up if you, maybe that's your voice. Maybe your culture is just loud. And it's being perceived as you're angry, or you're attacking them, or you're talking over them, you're not listening to them. All of these things are being pathologized. Crisis management, I'm just going to go over a few things. I know I'm like reading a lot of this, but actually there's a lot more. There are certain things we do after trauma, but what we know for certain is we can comfort each other just by talking to each other in back and forth. There doesn't have to be a special group. We are gregarious by nature. We gather on street corners, in bars, in grocery stores, in line, trade stories, and talk about what we saw. We are storytellers naturally. All of us, human beings, are storytellers naturally. And we do this naturally. So we don't need a platform like an Instagram, a podcast, a YouTube. Oh my God, another, what's the name of that other thing? A streaming thing, a live, whatever, to do all this, right? We don't need our own platform. We may feel guilty that another person got hit by the same bullet we got hit by. They died, we survived. And we may think about it more, right? Or we may try to make sense of things by going to church and looking at it spiritually. Basically, this is saying what we've known forever is that there are 6 billion human responses to any trauma and any loss, whether you're a child and you've been sexually molested over and over again, whether you've been beaten, battered, watched your parents beat and batter each other, and furniture flying across the room, and you're dodging, whether you've watched your mother be choked and drowned in a toilet, whether you've watched your mother be dragged out of the car to a bridge, whether you've watched your father be chased around the house with shears this big, whatever the hell it is that scared you and me. That's what this article is saying in the very beginning. Something scared us. The refrigerator went, oh boy, that scared me. Okay? Now, when it comes to shock, and I've been wanting to make this video forever, you guys. I know it's a long one, but I'm going for it. I have sat through 2-3 hour videos in other people's, and I know my content is all over the place, but I have been talking, if you have regularly come to my channel, you have heard me talk about the trauma model base, the history of how this became an industry of pathology, and how much money is to be made in so many trauma groups. And what I can quote you from my memory is on 9/11, September 11, 2001. I was on my way to my therapist appointment. And we sat there together realizing South Tower was down, the Pentagon was getting, and we just had like silence. Nothing was important that I was going to say. I was like, you know what? Can we just forget this? I mean, I know the cab just dropped me off, but I can't talk about nothing. I mean, the World Trade, we're under attack. And he didn't try to parlay that into Well, how does it make you feel about your trauma? There was something bigger going on in the world. And we both went through that together, that wonder, what's next? First tower, the second tower, on the Pentagon. There's another plane in Pennsylvania. What's next? A train or what's coming at us next? Should we be on the road? Should we go home? What should we do? And something that came out of my therapist's mouth was, I was like, oh my God, all those people that are dead. Oh my God. And he said, this is going to change trauma therapy forever. And if we look at this article, if you go to where this article is, I'm going to give you the linkage for it. There are many more articles that will tell you that even though this began in the 1970s, and it did, in the 1970s, I was in high school. My social worker was going into a hot new field. He was making a facility for men coming back from the war, Vietnam, with war fatigue, shell shock, what they were now calling post-traumatic stress. There was no post-traumatic stress before the 1970s. It wasn't identified. It wasn't pathologized. It wasn't medicalized. It wasn't a disease, and there was no treatment for it. By the 80s, 90s, they introduced repressed memory. Then came false memory. Okay? Talk about the yin and the yang. And now it's the recovery movement. And now you got people that, I tell you, there are some of us out there, some of us war horses out there that are like, I hear repressed memory. I go, I don't want to go uncover nothing in therapy. I don't want to hear what you're going to uncover, because if you don't know what happened to you, chances are it didn't happen to you. Because if you talk to a true victim, they don't forget. They wish they could forget. There is no little place in your mind that it goes and escapes to. I never forgot one damn thing that happened in my childhood. From 3 years old to 15. I never forgot one. There were no missing years. I remembered all of it. All the minutia detail, every detail. I could tell you what my grandmother was wearing. I could tell you what my mother was wearing. I could tell you what house I was in. I could tell you what she said, he said, they said, what policeman came, what car drove me away. I could tell you everything, and it was very traumatic. I was just told, don't tell. Don't. Nobody will believe you. Nobody cares. Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to know that information. You keep that to yourself. We're going to go to Grandma and Grandpa's now. We're going to go to your aunt and uncle's now. We're going to have a good time. We're going to do Christmas. My parents just did, we're going to do a happy event now, and she's going to forget that. Okay? But when I got to my grandparents' house, I was like this. And my grandmother would be, come here. Come here. She'd be looking at my parents. She knew. Like, when I want to go to bed at night, when I was like, my grandmother would be, come here. Come here. Come sit by me. Sit by me. It's okay. It's okay. Never mind that. It's okay. Somebody always knows, folks. Somebody always knows. So when people come up with their repressed memories later, 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, somebody always knew. This is an industry, and I'll never forget the way my therapist said, trauma industry is going to blow up. Trauma therapy is going to change. I mean, it's going to go off the hook. It's going to change. And he wasn't looking at dollar signs. He was just like, oh my God. That many people just died in front of the whole world. With that many people seeing it, he already knew about critical incident stress debriefing, right? So he was looking at it from a psychological view, like, oh my God, all those people died, but oh my God, all the trauma work that's going to come from 911. And you could trace it. From 911, it exploded. And there are 6 billion different responses because there are 6 billion humans on the earth. Now what we know for certain is there are 6 billion different responses to stress, trauma, and to and programs and all this other stuff, okay? And we are being there's claims being made that SPEC brain MRIs can detect all these little things, these little nuances. Oh, your brain's doing this right now. Your brain, go to Dr. Caroline Lee. Your brain is always fluctuating for every circumstance. I don't care if you got Parkinson's. I don't care if you just had a stroke. I don't care what. Your brain is always reconfiguring just like a computer, right? Until it flatlines, and instead it's always reconfiguring. Or it's just stuck in a loop. It's in buffer. Okay, so some of the places they took this information from was misperceptions in mourning, soldier surgeon in Malaya, sex and repression in savage society, emotional recovery and natural disasters, how to get back to life. I'm just going to name a few. Man's most dangerous myth, manufacturing victims, what the psychology industry is doing to people, by Robert Davies, multimedia. Please read that. Counseling does more harm than good. I'm not against counseling. This is counter therapy. And what it simply states is that a person only stays in shock for 2 weeks. Physical shock for 2 weeks. No matter what the trauma is. If I can find it. No matter what the trauma is, from the 1800s, the brain, find it. Acute shock. I'm wrong. It's not 2 weeks. No, I'm right. Acute shock lasts 10 days to 2 weeks. Confirmation of this goes as far back as 1800s. How you fare after 2 weeks depends in great part upon how you've taken care of yourself during the initial shock. So, we know that yes, debriefing can be helpful, but continuing to talk about it and reliving and recovering, no. After the initial shock, you can go back on with your life, reorganizing yourself with your new circumstances. If you remain preoccupied with horror, chances are good that you'll get depressed. So, continuing to talk about the horrific event that keeps bringing the images up, continuing to watch the towers fall with your loved one in it, continuing to watch the mass shooting, whatever it is that's scaring you, continuing to watch the insurrection, continuing to watch a horror flick, whatever it is that's haunting you, continuing to watch it is going to make you further down the road upset, anxious, depressed. So I've been talking about the pathology of trauma and the systemic use of the recovery model and the trauma model to actually keep people in therapy talking about the abuse and the abuse excuse. I wanted to make this video for a long time. Look, you guys, I'm not telling you you don't have pain. I'm not telling you it didn't happen. I'm not telling you something didn't happen. What I'm telling you is that when you go to therapy and you have no idea what the hell you're even in therapy for, it isn't a God incident. When you come out with more and you have something to gain from it, you have started in a book, a following, whatever, then I have to check your motive. That's all. Hang on 1 second. I'll be right back. Okay, so I didn't want to end that poorly. My phone was ringing. Okay, so I'm sure there was a nicer way for me to get away from that, but not really. I know a lot of people that are stuck in the abuse excuse, and I was one of those people. And I can only tell you what it's like to be on the other side of it, and that would be another video. There's a reason I keep myself from my therapist. There's a reason my therapist knows it's time, you've graduated, and there's no need to go back. There comes a time, there's no need to go look back. That's when you know you're on the other side of it. I can still get really pissed off about my life. I can look at all the trauma that happened to me, And I can feel rage and pain and depression and expel it. That barium animal, I can shoo it right on out, right? And clean up and think it's gone. And a few days comes along and it's not gone. It's the barium animal effect. A while later, you need to expose it again. Fill up all over again. So it's how well are you taking care of yourself? Do you have a healthy outlet? If that becomes therapy, well then you're going to be talking about it forever. You're going to be remembering it forever. Or do you just every now and again have to just give yourself a little extra fiber and have a little, get rid of the waste? There's an entire school of thought to make more and more money. And the insurance companies, they'll only pay so much until you go on disability, and then Medicaid takes over and Medicare. It's true. If you really want to claim you're a victim and then a survivor and then a thriver, you got to put about 3, 4, 5 years into therapy. Talk therapy. Is talk therapy helpful? For a little while. Do we do that naturally as human beings? Yes. Does it help to draw it? Write it? I have one lady in my life, I have watched her draw the same self-portrait of herself over and over again. And I just kind of chuckle every time she adds to it or subtracts for it. And every time I want to say, who you drawing? But I always know it's her. And she is just going inward and she's drawing herself over and over and over. It's her self-portrait. And what I see in her pictures, she's screaming of the terror she saw, the pain she felt, with a mouth that couldn't talk about it. So, how many times do we have to draw? How many times does a child have to color the red and the black and the orange to show they're angry? After a while, you're just reinforcing the anger. After a while, you're just reinforcing the fear. So, again, and there's a lot of articles out there, and there's a lot of views. I know that this article is called The Trauma Industry, and I have done many videos on the trauma industry. And if you don't believe there's a trauma industry, just go look on a bookshelf anywhere. Trauma. And some people are just putting trauma on their books. And it boggles my mind that there are so many different approaches to trauma. Because we are all traumatized. Unfortunately, you don't get off this planet without being traumatized. Unfortunately, we're all going to have a dog that dies, a cat that dies, a dog that gets run over by a car, a neighbor that suddenly is found dead. We're all going to know somebody that got abused in their house. There's going to be that weird uncle that touches a child all wrong, or that child bully that does something to someone that's not right. There's always going to be horrible things that happen on this earth. Now, if you want to Christianize it, spiritualize it, God already told us there would be trials. There would be tribulations. But God would be there in the midst. And God was our refuge. So, if you want to go the spiritual route, then just look up Psalm 91. Because God told us there will be sudden terror. And it will be flying at you during the day, and it'll be hitting you suddenly at night. So, that's all I'm going to say. Have a nice day, and I hope you'll read this article. Thanks for listening and hanging in if you did. Bye.